I'm Jim Collison. We are live from Infotec 2015 doing interviews for keynotes and session speakers all week. And I'm here with Everett McKay. Everett, thanks for coming out and being part of what we're doing.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. Let's get to know you a little bit. Just tell me who you are, where you're from, who you work for, what you do, those kinds of things.
Okay. Well, my company is UX Design Edge, and I'm self-employed, and I live in St. Albans, Vermont, of all places.
Oh, very cool. Wow, you're a long way from home.
I am a long way from home.
And so do you mean you own the company? You're the one, you're a one-stop shop?
I am.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So just to give you a little bit about my background and what I do and how I got to be here in the first place. My company, I do UX design training and consulting services, primarily to software teams that don't have sufficient design talent. And as it happens, I've discovered that's pretty much everybody. Most software teams, they're doing UIs, and either they don't have any UX design talent at all, or alternatively, they've got some. But it's not uncommon to have a very large, well-known company with a very large team of developers, and maybe they've got 5 or 6 people in the UX team trying to service a very, very large company. It's the exception where teams really have all the resources they need. Not even Microsoft. So I worked at Microsoft for 10 years. Not even Microsoft is in that situation. The typical team would have very few resources. I worked in Windows. Even Windows, the high-profile features had a lot of design talent. Pretty much everybody else was on their own.
Okay.
And so just to kind of give you a little of my background. So my background is actually as a developer. I got into the UX space as a developer, which is a little bit unusual. Most people
have back door.
Most people have a design background.
Right.
I don't have a design background. I'm not a visual designer.
Well, but you are. You came in through the development.
Well, but so it's more the interaction side as opposed to the visual side.
Okay.
So like in my case, I work with a visual designer. So she's the expert. We work together on projects.
Yeah.
So as a software developer, early in my career, I just appreciated that having a great user experience was kind of the key to success. That if you had a great UI, people loved your product, and if you didn't, people wouldn't want to use it, obviously. Yeah. And so I just kind of naturally gravitated towards that. And just to give you kind of the full backstory, as a developer, I went to a Visual Studio, actually Visual C++ conference in Boston. I attended a talk on UX design. And I was very unimpressed by it. It just didn't really speak to me. It's like half the audience left, the other half was kind of falling asleep. So I kind of thought, well, I can do this better. So on the way home, I kind of conceived of a book. And I ended up writing it. It was called Developing User Experiences for Microsoft Windows. That was published by Microsoft Press.
Great.
One thing led to another. I got a job at Microsoft to be a program manager, first in Windows Server, then in Windows Client, to work on UI as a user interface program manager. I did that for about 10 years. The interesting thing there is that while I was doing this, a friend of mine, Scott Burkham, was teaching an internal training class called UI Design Basics on how to help more technical people understand UI. He decided to move on and do something else, and for some reason I can't entirely explain, I volunteered to teach that class. So I took that over and I did this as part of my, it wasn't part of my job, it was just something I did on the side just for the fun. Did that for about 3 years.
Okay.
And when I started thinking about what I wanted to do after Microsoft, I thought, well, there's a need for this, and this is something I have a set of skills in this that is unique. And so that's where I
very cool. What year was that you left Microsoft?
It was 2010.
Oh, okay, so pretty recent.
Yeah,
last 5 years or so.
So I've been doing this for 5 years. One thing I like to point out, in case it matters to anybody, so I was on the Windows Server team as well as the Windows Client team. I worked on Windows Vista, Windows 7. I did not work on Windows 8.
Hey, I don't listen. So ironically, I'm a Windows MVP, so I'm the Windows expert, and I mean, Windows 8 has had some problems, but I think the media has made a bigger deal out of it than it actually is. Especially now, Windows 8.1 with the updates have fixed a lot of the problems. There's still some things. We see Windows 10 coming, and that gets even a little bit better, back to a more Windows 7 user experience. Let me ask you this. Some people say this idea of the experience, what you're talking about, is that the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or experience is in the eye of the beholder. Everybody interacts. How do you know when you're having a bad experience? I mean, what is the difference? What are the fundamental core differences between a good experience and a bad experience? And how do you measure that?
Wow. So I actually want to kind of split that question in half.
Yeah.
So I'll take, first of all, the subjective side of this. So one interesting thing about UI design that's so challenging, and especially for developers, is that very often UI is considered to be a subjective thing. Very often we consider art, beauty and things like that, how it makes us feel and that sort of thing.
Right.
So there's a lot of subjectivity in the UI design process. And, just knowing how developers work, developers are very uncomfortable with that. And it's also just not a very productive way of having a conversation, because if we have a discussion about personal opinion, we might not agree on anything.
Right.
So what I discovered while working at Microsoft is that really a user interface is not a subjective thing. It really is an objective thing, but we just have to look at it from objective terms. And the terms I look at are effective human communication. The user interface is nothing but really a form of human communication. We're trying to communicate to people how to perform a task. And the interesting thing is, if we look at a UI in the terms of how effectively does it communicate the task that the user is trying to do, that is a much more objective, much less subjective. It's not about art, it's about communication. So we might disagree about art, but if we talk about, how do we best communicate this task to our target users, we're going to agree on that, because we're going to have a more objective framework for having the discussion, making decisions. And so that's one thing I really try to do. One thing that's really interesting to me about UI design is that there's one word everybody uses. If you're guessing what it is, the word begins with an I.
Keep going.
Intuitive.
Oh,
we always talk about intuitive UI, right?
Yeah,
it's like, oh, intuitive, that's intuitive,
I always
that's
hear
not
that
intuitive.
in terms of not intuitive. I always hear that. No, that's not very intuitive.
That's true.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, I've become convinced that nobody really knows what this term means. We use it all the time as if it were the most meaningful thing in the world. It's not. And the reason I know it's not is because I ask people. Somebody will say, hey, I love this UI. It's so intuitive. I'll say, okay, interesting. Tell me what that means to you. And it's surprising how weak the answers are. Nobody really knows what this thing means. And so one thing I really try to do in my class is actually give a very clear definition of what this means. It gives very specific attributes on what to look for, so that we can take a UI, we can look for the presence or absence of those attributes, and we're going to know whether or not it's intuitive. And I find, especially for a developer audience, just taking this subjectivity, personal opinion out of it, having very objective criteria, makes the whole process a whole lot more effective.
Can you give maybe one or two of those, those objective pieces? So what are those?
Well, the interesting thing is, there's a lot to it, but if you just think about the steps that you go through when you're interacting with something, it's very, very straightforward. So I want to do something. I want to change the volume of a microphone. So I start with a goal. I want to change the volume of the microphone. First step, I have to discover the thing that's going to enable me to achieve that goal. I have to discover the feature when I need it. It's called discoverability. Next thing is, I'm going to look at the UI, and I'm going to look at the visual appearance of the elements that I need to interact with, and try to figure out how to do the interaction. Those are called affordances. So in this case, we have a set of knobs. Knobs afford twisting. We're going to turn the knobs in order to increase or decrease the volume. The third attribute I'm looking for is what I call predictability. We need to be able to accurately predict the result of the interaction. So in the case of a knob, if I want to increase the volume, am I going to turn left or am I going to turn right? I need to be able to accurately predict which way to turn.
So as an example, turning left, at least in the United States, turning something to the left means it's going to go down, and turning something to the right, just because those are common, that's generally common the way everyone else designs the interface, right?
So there's two interesting things there. There's consistency with other things. So if we were to do it differently than everybody does it, that would be confusing. The example I like to use there is my Panasonic remote control, where they flip the volume and the channel buttons. So that's very confusing. So there's consistency, but there's also another concept that we call natural mapping. So there's like physical natural mapping, up, down, left, right. There's also cultural natural mapping. So we read from left to right, top to bottom, in Western cultures, so we kind of expect things on the right to go forward, things on the left to go back. So we kind of expect, based on that cultural natural mapping, turning to the right would increase. So the interesting thing is, if we were designing this for a worldwide audience, would we expect that natural mapping to work everywhere in the world? And the interesting thing is, that would be something I'd want to research. I believe the answer is, even though some cultures read from left to right, when they're dealing with technology, they kind of change that mapping because they know it's Western. So they so in a more of an Eastern culture where they have the opposite reading order, it's probably going to be okay. But the interesting thing is to understand, first of all, why we think that way. Second of all, realize it might be a cultural issue.
Well, mouse scrolling is that way, depending. Sometimes Windows and Mac, it's different. there's different ways people expect that mouse to roll. And that's been turned around a couple times in various UIs.
Right. So are we moving the document, or are we moving the viewport?
Right. Yeah. So it does bring up an interesting point. Did I cut you off?
No. Okay. So listen, you asked me about
1, 2, 3. Yeah.
So you asked for 3, but that's the first 3. Is discoverability, affordance, and predictability.
Yeah.
So those are the first thing. If we can get through those, we're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
But you also asked me about,
can they be measured? So when we're talking about a user experience, can I measure that in a way to give a very, very, very objective view of, yes, this is working, or no, it's not? In other words, the way I've set this up, maybe it's a button in a particular location, and can I get stats, data on that, saying whether it's actually working or not from a communication standpoint?
Oh yeah. So we kind of explored. I think the first part of your question, I said, let's make it about communication. Let's try to understand exactly what it means to be intuitive.
Yeah.
Next question is, can we measure this?
How do we
personally, I have a challenge with measuring stuff. A lot of people, especially usability engineers, they are experts at measuring things in very scientifically valid ways. Just based on practical observation, though, I don't see that many situations where we really need to see the numbers.
Okay.
More often than not, it's just being able to distinguish good design from bad design is going to get us like 80–90% of the way there. And sometimes we really do need the metrics, but usually I don't go out of my way to measure things. So in the case of like whether or not something's intuitive, the thought process I go through is, my basic principle is that everything that all our target users need to do should be intuitive. That doesn't mean everything should be intuitive. Certain things that might be advanced, infrequent, or optional, where it's just not worth it to make things intuitive. Sometimes it's just not worth the cost, and there's a cost. Maybe we put too much stuff on the screen. Maybe to make things forgiving. Maybe it hurts performance, that sort of thing. So we have a decision. Do we want this to be intuitive or not? Sometimes it's not worth it. And as long as it's advanced, infrequent, or optional, these are things that more advanced users are going to learn, then that's okay. So to use a simple example, on mobile, we use gestures for everything. And if we look at those attributes we just talked about, we had discoverability, affordance, and also perhaps predictability. Notice that in gestures in mobile, we don't have the first 2, maybe even the third one, you could argue, right? So let's say we've got a list of things and we want to delete something from the list. So applying that thinking, we can use a gesture like a swipe to delete something from a list, and that's okay if it's not intuitive, as long as there's some other way that is fully intuitive for basic users. So in the case of like email, we have an explicit trash can icon where somebody can tap that. So even if they don't know the gesture, they're still okay. So we can have more advanced shortcuts for expert users, and those don't have to be intuitive. That's absolutely fine. So it's not so much measuring, it's more of like just applying the principles to me. And what I find is that most of the time, just applying the principles tells you everything you need to know.
Okay. Your session here, we may have covered actually a bunch of stuff that you're doing in your session, but what were you giving it on, and what were a couple of the points you were hoping people would walk out with?
Well, so the name of my topic was 6 insights about user experience design that all developers and managers must know. And so given 45 minutes, that's about all I could do. So I hit upon 6 issues, but the heart of my presentation, though, knowing this is a developer audience, is just to really kind of explore a concept that I call designing like a programmer. And the idea behind that is that, just being a programmer, understanding how other programmers work, usually what we as programmers do when we're creating a UI is we basically just put the raw data structures directly on the screen, and we expect that to be usable. So a simple example of that would be, let's say, a date, right? So we put the date on the field directly in the UI. We just put it there. We expect that to be usable. How many ways can we get that wrong? The surprising answer is a lot of ways. And the point I made in the talk is, it's not just the mechanical date, the number that is something that we care about. It's the meaning that date has. What does that date mean to me? That's the thing we need to put in the UI. And if I have to do math, or if I have to look the date up in a calendar to make it meaningful, we've done it wrong. So a simple example of this that I gave in the class today is from an app called Trip Assist, which I love. It's wonderful. It's from Expedia, but it tells me about my upcoming flights. So as it happens, I have an upcoming flight, and it has the date, numeric date. Question I have as a user is, is that going to be on Sunday? Am I traveling Sunday, or I'm traveling on Monday? That's the thing I want to know. It's not there. It's got the numeric date, which doesn't mean anything to me. I have to look it up in the calendar.
Yeah.
So if you think about what's the purpose of this app, well, it's to see the status of upcoming flights because I don't have them memorized, plus to see the status of flights I'm currently on now.
Sure.
It's all about informing myself about status. I really need that day of the week there to build confidence that I know when the reservation is free.
Yeah.
So it's a small thing, but it really, in terms of usability, it's huge. So the issue I'm addressing is what I call mechanical usability. That what developers tend to do is design UIs that work mechanically. Yes, mechanically somebody can get the task done. Yes, the date is there. Yes, I can fill in the date, that sort of thing. But the thing we're missing is who's using it, why they're using it, how they're thinking about it, and making sure that we're really facilitating that.
Yeah, yeah. Would you also go as far as say on the date that it might say, you might use words like today and tomorrow, and then begin to add the days of the week? And then,
exactly.
Yeah.
So an interesting thing, and this is something that Trip Assist does right, but on the very bottom they have a status update. They tell you when they last refreshed that information, because that's crucial to understand if that information is meaningful or not, right? If it's a week old, it's not useful information. And they don't give you the date and time. They'll say,
minutes,
today, or they'll say just now,
hours,
or something like that. So you don't have to do the math to figure out when it actually updated.
Yeah, taking it to the next step of the way we need the data, the way we want to think about it, right?
Right,
Which
exactly.
Is,
And just going back to this communication thing, that's the technique I like to use. So what would we say in person? So if somebody said, when was this last updated? I wouldn't give you the date and time. I would say just now.
Yeah.
Right? That's what I'd say in person.
Or a minute ago.
So exactly. So that would be the right UI here. We shouldn't expect the user to know what the current time and date is and do the math and figure out how recent it is.
Yeah, yeah. Let me ask you a question. You may or may not be prepared for it, but as we talk about these things, we think about Siri, Cortana. I now have a Echo. These are real-time devices that are giving us feedback into it. Do you look at any of those and have any comments as far as how well are we beginning to do these? The machine's talking back to us.
Okay.
In that sense, you have any opinion on those?
So I kind of do. So I have to admit that I haven't spent quality time with either Siri or Cortana. Okay. At some point, I just turned them off. It's like, I get it, good enough. But one thing I actually did just this week is I was driving around Omaha.
Yeah.
And I had my Garmin GPS, and I also had Google Maps working as a GPS. And so I was driving, and both were talking to me at the same time. But the interesting thing is, what I noticed is that Garmin was kind of sort of close to what we'd actually say in person, whereas Google was right on. If someone were in the car telling me what to do, that's exactly the way Google presented it. And I was very, very impressed by that. And you kind of compare the little differences here and there. It's like, the Google just did it right. Yeah. They said, choose the 3 rightmost lanes or something like that. Yeah. Just saying it exactly the way a person would say it. Whereas by contrast, I found that Garmin was a little bit more technical. Yeah. So, I don't know where you wanted to go with this conversation, but
interesting.
But with respect to that thing, I think that's, again, going back to this idea, we could say it's a question of art, or we could say it's subjective, what I like or dislike. But I think if we really look at it in forms of effective human communication, that is a much more objective way of evaluating which one is better. And from my point of view, clearly the Google design is the better design.
What's the right communication in the situation that makes it best for the user that can make a decision?
What would I actually say? Plain, friendly language in a way that's not confusing.
So is the right experience always the human experience in the sense, even if a machine is doing it, if it's as close to the human experience as like if you and I were talking, is that the right experience in most cases?
Well, what I like to point out is it isn't necessarily literally what we would say. It would be close to what we would say. So it isn't. So one thing I really go out of my way to make sure that I don't confuse people with is I'm not suggesting our UI should be chatty, for example. We don't want to have any unnecessary verbiage. If what we'd say in person would be one word, that's what the UI ought to be. Right. So just to be clear on that. But Let's see. Well, so of course there are other considerations. But if we have a product that is designed for everyday ordinary users and efficiency and scalability are not top criteria, probably that's true. If by contrast we have a data ordering system and our goal is to crank as many orders through as quickly as possible, efficiency drives those decisions. We don't worry so much about being intuitive or being pleasant or enjoyable to use.
Right.
So the human experience is less important in situations like that.
Yeah. No, very good. Want to ask you, I've been asking everybody kind of just a final question as we go out. So it wasn't as hard as you thought it was going to be.
Piece of cake.
Great conversation. I just kind of enjoy talking about these things. Was you look to the future, the next 3 to 5 years, and you look at technology that's out there, it doesn't necessarily need to be related to this topic, but what are you excited about that's coming, that you know is coming, or you'd like to see come in the next 3 to 5 years that's maybe not here today that's related to technology?
I kind of sort of have an answer to that, but so I've written 3 books in the past, and I'm kind of thinking maybe about writing a book about the Internet of Things.
Oh, okay.
But the interesting slant I'm going to have about that is that this vision I have for this book, it's going to be like 8 chapters about how to design kind of user interfaces for more physical devices rather than traditional like mobile or desktop software. More physical devices like microphone or various devices that we might have.
Wearables type deal?
Could be anything, but a microwave oven.
Which, by the way, hasn't been changed in 35 years.
It's long overdue.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, the microwave could do a lot for you.
And so I'm thinking, well, there's a kind of a strong Internet of Things angle to this. But the thinking I've got is I'd like to address this, but I really want to focus on just how to design the products well. Physical, I call it embedded software. It doesn't necessarily have to be embedded, but how do we design the physical product as well as we possibly can? The interesting observation I've made there is that a lot of hardware products, quite frankly, are very poorly designed. And there's actually a cultural reason for this. And that cultural reason is if you go to talk to hardware vendors, they perceive themselves as hardware companies. That software truly is an afterthought for a lot of these guys. And so they don't really have a lot of design resources, design talent. They just kind of wing it, like we talked about before. And it's much more so on the hardware side. So my angle on this is that I'm thinking about the Internet of Things world, but the thing I really want to stress is that the base product still has to be extremely well designed, right? So if we're designing a microwave oven, it has to be a rockin' great microwave oven. If we're designing a refrigerator, it should be an awesome refrigerator. Nobody's going to take an internet-connected refrigerator that's poorly designed and unreliable and just horrible to use and say, it's really a poorly designed refrigerator, but it's connected to the internet, it's got a mobile app, 5 stars.
Yes.
It's not going to happen. It has to do the basic design extremely well. And only then does the connectivity become interesting. And I think that the kind of the direction in which we're going is, we're all just excited about the prospects of these various interconnected devices. It almost reminds me, have you ever seen the book Useless Japanese Inventions? Well, it's just these crazy things that people have come up with that solve real problems, but they're just kind of crazy. I think we're going to kind of go through that phase where we just kind of do all kinds of crazy stuff and then realize, hey, you know what? These things really have to be well designed too before the Internet of Things starts to become interesting. So I want to help people kind of understand what that means and then figure out how to truly take advantage of this new connectivity and capabilities in a way that isn't gimmicky. So I'm kind of thinking not for the book for next year, but the book 10 years from now, once all the hype is kind of died down.
I think we could use some of that now. Don't maybe iterate on that book, put chapters out at a time, and once a quarter put a chapter out, let people that's kind of this new trend in book writing, is to write it, kind of open source the book, write it, put it out, let people interact, maybe make some changes, write the next chapter. But I do a lot of tech podcasting, and we have a lot of people talking about home automation and the Internet of Things. I think some of that influence would be helpful now. So don't wait too long. I think it's, you like you said, there's GE is putting out a app for your fridge that you can change the temperature on your fridge through an app on the phone. And I'm like, I have the control on my fridge and I never change it. Why would I Why would I install an app to
Right.
do we have engineers solving problems that
Right.
don't exist?
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
They're giving so much control or micro control over things I don't just make it, alert me when it's broken. But I don't, my fridge should just keep stuff cold.
Right. Just one last thought there.
Yeah.
So I do on occasion, and I really appreciate when this happens, I do on occasion help out founders, people starting up companies. And, it seems like entrepreneur school, the course 101, it seems to be like one thing they tell everybody is to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to solve a problem.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, no, that's not good enough. It's not good enough anymore. I've got hundreds of problems, thousands of problems in my life. I got no solution whatsoever wherefore, and I'm absolutely fine.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But if you solve a problem in a way that has value to me, in a way that's worth it, in a way that accomplishes something I care about, then you've got my attention.
Right.
So it's not just about solving problems, it's about delivering value. And, it's just having that little difference in perspective that has a huge impact. So we can make an internet-connected device that is a curiosity because it allows us to do something we could never do before, but quite frankly, we just don't care.
Right.
So it's going to be a curiosity. Nobody's going to get all excited about it. But once we can do something that actually is very important to people, delivers value, then we've got a good story.
Yeah, no, great point. And I think the Internet of Things is going to be that space of coming up with solutions for things that don't exist. They'll burn through a bunch of things, and that discovery process I don't think is always bad. Sometimes we discover other things through that, but it's the Wild West right now. The home automation is the Wild West, and everybody's doing everything, and it's not all connected. And we have thermostats, and we have fridges, and now connected dishwashers, which you. Okay, maybe alert me when it's done, and that's all I need to know. Well, Everett, thank you for taking a few minutes to do this. I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Yeah, you bet. You bet.